Okay, it's Sunday, which means against my better judgment it's time to go to Reddit and see what we can find in this hive of scum and villainy. So I've been to the Overwatch University subreddit ahead of time and just scraped all the questions off the first couple pages, and we're going to answer the questions now while some footage of Dragon Ball FighterZ plays in the background, because it is a better game than Overwatch is. And if you're wondering which side I'm on, just look for whichever side you start with Android 21. So first question is, how come Sigma's accretion, E, goes through Genji's deflect, E? And I don't know, and it makes me really fucking mad that it does so. So if you know me, you know I'm a big fan of consistency in video game mechanics, and Sigma is just about the least consistent character in all of existence for a few different reasons. First off, Rock goes through deflect, Rock goes through defense matrix, it goes through Sigma's absorb. That's all maddening, because it's a big ol' projectile, and it just goes through all this stuff. Other reasons Sigma is annoying is his absorb is basically defense matrix, right, with the benefit that you get to convert the damage to shields at the end. But, do you know what it's got that deflect doesn't? It stops Roadhog's hook. Why does it do this? I don't know. I hope it's a bug, because it's maddening that it does that. Other reason that Sigma is very aggravating. Lucio cannot use sound barrier in the air. He has to land for sound barrier to work. But if you use gravitic flux, guess what? Lucio doesn't need to touch the ground anymore. Also maddening. I also hope that one's a bug, but that one could legitimately be a game balancing choice they made, even though it's absolutely fucking insane to watch. So, I don't know why The Rock goes through all of these things. It's very upsetting to me that it does, because yet again, we've already got this with other things. Like, why do most heroes hurt themselves with their own explosions, except Junkrat and D.Va, who are immune to their own explosions? Pharah's wearing some high-tech battle armor, Junkrat is dirty. Immune. So, I don't know. It's very upsetting, and goddamn, the game gets a little bit less consistent every hero that gets released. So, next up is, how do you tank at lower elos? And the answer to that one is basically, like, if we're talking like real low elos, frankly, it's pick Winston every game. And your teammates are gonna shit-talk you, because they're gonna go, that's not a shield tank, we don't have a shield, no shield, bad, unga. So they'll shit-talk you for it, but in low SRs, people do not know how to play around a shield to begin with, and they are frequently playing heroes that don't really play around shields anyway, you know, flankers, Pharah, Widowmaker, even though Widow can play around shields, they won't. So, your teammates won't do it, and your teammates won't play around shields, and they're bad anyway, so you might as well just pick Winston. And you can just jump on the bad men and deal with them yourselves, because if your team's bad, the enemy team's also going to be bad. So they're going to be bad at aiming, so they're going to be bad at doing damage to you, they're not going to help each other, so you're just going to get to bully them for free. So, you know, just pick Winston. Now, that's not always going to work. If they're playing a bunch of people that counter Winston, then this advice doesn't hold true anymore, which means instead you can pick, if you're good at him, you can play Hammond, because Hammond is not countered by the same people that Winston is a lot of the time. Though Hammond is, like, super countered by Mei and Sombra, so, you know, low SR, someone knows how to play Sombra. Funny joke, right? So, you can pick him instead, same deal. And if you can't pick any divey boys because of what the enemy team is playing, then just pick Orisa or Sigma, because they're the tanks that have, like, the least reliance on their teammates being competent, basically. Because, you know, if you're playing, like, Reinhardt, you need your teammates to actually do stuff. If you're playing Zarya, you need your teammates to actually do stuff. If you're playing Orisa, Sigma, you can do damage yourself. Sigma has, like, good abilities. He does damage himself. He's not as dependent on his teammates as someone like Reinhardt is, so he's got a little bit more agency. But he's harder to play than these people. Orisa is similar. She's more dependent on her teammates than Sigma is, but you can still do it, like, it's fine. And she gets to damage the badman herself. Her ultimate might make her her teammates actually do some damage, so that's cool, you know. Basically, don't pick people like Reinhardt and Zarya, people who are super dependent on teammates actually doing stuff. And if you're playing off-tank instead of main tank, then just pick Roadhog. Easy game. If you're off tank, it's super easy. You just pick Roadhog, dude. Just hook the badmen and kill them. You don't need to be healed because you're playing Roadhog. You can kill people yourself. Easy peasy. Just pick Roadhog. Don't pick anybody else. If you're in low SR, they'll tell you to. They'll want you to pick someone else. They're gonna want you to pick Zarya. Do not pick Zarya. It's a trap. Your teammates will be bad and not play well, so you'll just be sad because she's a very teamwork dependent hero. Don't do it. Just pick Roadhog and dunk on the bad men. Here's my son. Hello, my son. Now I have to... Just gonna make some noise while we do this, because now he's gonna want to sit on the tray, and that's gonna make noise. Oh, no. So, anyway, that's basically what you do there. So, next up is Sombra even viable? And yes, Sombra is viable, is going to be the short answer to this one. Sombra is just also very hard to play. Sombra isn't as good in this meta as she was in the last one, because the last one we saw a lot more Hammond and Doomfist than we're seeing currently, so Sombra isn't as good because, boy, did she fucking counter those two heroes, right? She still does, not like she suddenly doesn't counter those two heroes, they're just less frequently seen. Though I still see a fuck lot of Doomfist, to be fair. She's fine. Like, the thing is that's a little bit harder when she's playing against, like, big shield comps, because it's harder for her to get to the bad men, but, like, Emp breaks both the shields, like, the people who are deploying the shields do not like to be hacked, no tank likes being hacked still. They're probably playing DPS like Mei still. Mei's fine. If they're playing Symmetra, Photon Barrier is fucking annoying, and Emp can do 5,000 damage, so that's pretty sick if they've got a Symmetra, so that's nice. Like, she's still viable. It's just she's not as good as she was previously, because you don't get to just, like, hard counter two members of their team every time for free, right? You have to put a little bit more effort into it now, sadly. And, like, Sombra's hard to play, so that's the sad part, right? But she is definitely still viable, she's just hard to play. That was basically it, like, you know, short answer, yeah, she's viable, she's just hard to play, and she doesn't suit this meta as well as she did in the previous one, so you'll find her harder to play as well, but yes, she is. Next up is it better to enable a teammate or to counterpick an opponent? And this was really talking about low SR, but I'll say broadly right at the top is it kind of depends on the person they've picked. Because if they've picked Bastion, you don't have a choice. You have to play around that person. You know, you can't really play to counterpick anymore, because if you're not picking to enable the Bastion, you just have a teammate on your team that's doing literally nothing, right? So, you know, in that kind of situation, you're not given a choice. You have to play around the Bastion. Torbjorn can be similar, where if you're not playing to enable Torbjorn, frequently Torbjorn ends up doing absolutely nothing, so you're strongly incentivized to enable the Torbjorn rather than counterpick people, though Torbjorn's less dependent than Bastion is, who you don't get a choice with Bastion. You don't, unfortunately. So, that's, like, you know, and otherwise, like, if they pick, like, Pharah, you're incentivized to as well, but at the same time, like, if the enemy team are playing around Pharah, and they've got a bunch of counterpicks to Pharah, then you don't worry about enabling the Pharah anymore. You ask the Pharah to stop playing the person that is being counterpicked, and the Pharah will usually say, no, fuck you, pick Mercy. So, you know. If someone on your team has decided to play, like, Genji, then you are incentivized to play Ana. and Ana is just broadly a good hero, so this isn't a particularly big deal, right, to pick Ana to enable Genji, because Ana's just a good hero, so that's usually just fine to do, because Genji is only really good because of his ultimate, and Nano Boost obviously makes his ultimate even better. It takes it from like 9 out of 10 to 11 out of 10, right? So you're strongly incentivized to with Genji. Outside of, but like, in low SR, it'll usually be better to counterpick the enemy team, because the only thing in low SR you can be assured of is your own skill, really. Now, there are exceptions to this. If they have picked Bastion, you still have to play to it. Still have to pick enabling Bastion, because otherwise there will be a teammate on you will be a member of your team doing literally nothing except feed and die every single team fight. So, again, if it's Bastion, you don't get a choice, unfortunately. Bastion's this way as a hero. Yeah, this is one of the reasons no one likes Bastion. So, there you go. But, like, low SR, it's better to counterpick people, because you can't be assured of your teammate's success. Someone like, if you're playing support and someone picks Genji, it's still fine to pick Ana, because she's like a broadly good hero still. And, you know, it's really hard to fuck up Nanoblade, so you're usually good regardless, but sometimes they will still fuck it up. So, yeah, in low SR, it's better to counterpick people, except outside of circumstances where they pick Bastion, so you don't get a choice. Because if you're playing, like, if you're gonna pick, like, Pharah, or if you're gonna pick Mercy to synergize with your Pharah, you've got no guarantee that Pharah is good. In fact, if you're in Silver or below, like, high likelihood that Pharah is going to be dead weight and drag you into situations where you're going to die as Mercy. So fuck her. She can play by herself. You can play a hero that's better for counterpicking the enemy team, or they're just that you're better at, right? Fuck it. You can't depend on her. So there you go. Depends on the circumstance, but if in low SR, nah, don't worry about it, dude. Outside of the Bastion, just pick to counterpick the other team. Otherwise, you know, it depends. Depends on who they've picked more than anything else. And ultimately, like, skill with hero is still greater than all other aspects. So if the person that would enable the teammate is someone that you don't know how to play, don't do it. Because if you don't know how to play that hero, you are not going to be able to exploit the reason they synergize with that other teammate well. So don't worry about it. And, you know, if you're thinking about counterpicking the enemy team, but you don't know how to play the person that is the counterpick, don't do it, because you won't be able to counterpick them, because you don't know how to play that hero. Skill with the hero is still greater than all other aspects of the hero pick, so don't worry about that shit, if you don't know how to play the hero. Just play whoever you know how to play. And that's basically the answer right there. And the answer was basically, it depends, you know. So, next up is, how good is Soldier against Double Shield? So, he's okay. You know, he's not the worst. He's one of the better shield breakers in the game, but he's not as good as, like, Junkrat or Hanzo. And playing Soldier is gonna fall off really fast in terms of, like, SR. Well, not really fast. That makes it sound like he's gonna stop being good as soon as you hit, like, Gold or something, which isn't true. Once you hit, like, Diamond, or maybe even very high Plat, you're gonna find that Soldier starts being, like, really bad at that point, because he's fine low SR, where people... your teammates won't play with you, and the enemy don't really know how to play the game yet, because he's a really independent hero because of Biotic Field, so he's not as dependent on his teammates, which is good when your teammates aren't going to play around you. And he's good at punishing people that don't know how to play the game, because it's way easier to get picks on people as Soldier if they're just going to stand out in the open so you can use Tac Visor and kill multiple people, or they're just going to be out behind their barriers so that you can hit them with the Helix Rocket and burst them to death, right? You know. But as soon as you get to higher SRs, people stop doing this shit. They start actually knowing how to play the game, which is terrible for Soldier, because then Tac Visor becomes dramatically worse. They're going to actually be better at diving you, which is also going to be terrible for you as Soldier. Though Soldier is still one of the better heroes to play if you're getting dived hard, because he's pretty tanky as far as DPS go. And because your teammates know how to work with their team now to a reasonable degree, the benefit he brings from being independent is less valuable compared to other utility he could bring, right? Because someone like McCree just has more utility than Soldier does. Soldier's utility by himself is like, he doesn't need his teammates to do stuff. He can just do stuff. Just go stand on the high ground and have a great time by himself. But that's not as good of the utility as, like, Flashbang, you know? It's just not. Like, Hanzo's got more utility because, like, Sonic Arrow, Dragon Strike is a good, area denial ultimate as well as a combo ultimate, whereas Tac Visor is only really good at killing people that are bad, you know, so his utility falls off in usefulness as you climb in ranks. But for low rank, Soldier will be fine versus these things. He's okay. But if we're talking about just like raw shield breaking power, you can still be playing better heroes, because you can be playing Junkrat, you can be playing Hanzo, you know, like, you can be playing these people who are good at breaking barriers still, but have other or circumnavigating the barrier, which Hanzo can also do sometimes as well. Which Soldier just isn't as good as these heroes, basically. So even McCree is, like, good at breaking barriers, ever since they buffed his left-click recovery. McCree is also good at breaking barriers and has more utility than Soldier. So he is fine, but you really have to want to play Soldier, basically. If you want to play Soldier, by all means, you fucking play Soldier, dude. But there is no reason to play Soldier over other heroes, really, other than you want to play him, which is a fine enough reason, but just bear that in mind, pretty much. So there you go. So next up is, should I still be using Looking for Group now that Roll Queue is out? Implying Looking for Group was ever actually worth using. So next up is how to synergize with Hammond as the other tank. And it's not really a matter of, like, synergizing with Hammond, really. So this is going to sound really weird. Let me clarify. So you're not really trying to synergize with Hammond. You're trying to capitalize on what Hammond is doing, which is not really the same thing. Synergizing with somebody is going like, they picked Reinhardt, so I'm going to pick Zarya, right? Because Zarya's kit naturally works well with Reinhardt's. Whereas, you don't need to do that with Hammond. All you have to do is, like, capitalize on what he's doing, which is generally fucking people up and being distracting, right? So, you can pick, like, any tank with Hammond, really. It doesn't matter that much. 'Cause he's, like, technically a main tank, so even the off tanks technically work, but I advise you to think of Hammond as an off tank. But you can pick, like, any of the main tanks with him, and it's fine, because you can still capitalize on the things he's doing, regardless of who you're playing. Because if he's distracting the enemy team and getting them to blow a bunch of cooldowns on him, right, and just, like, distracting them, like, any tank can capitalize on that to, like, walk forward and make space, right? Like, all of them can do this. If he's pushing people out of position, which hopefully he's doing as Hammond, any tank can capitalize on that, because you can run up at them. If you're playing Reinhardt, you can shoot them, you can halt them, you can throw abilities at them if you're like Orisa or Sigma, right? Like, you can do all of these things to capitalize without actually worrying about, like, who you're picking with Hammond. So, just like, and this is the thing as well, is that Hammond is going to be off doing his own thing a lot of the time. This is just, like, how Hammond players are. So, like, you basically just capitalize on what Hammond's doing. If he's getting a bunch of cooldowns blown on him, fucking push W, dude. Get in there. Go in and start, like, trying to capitalize on that. Because, like, if he's drawing people's attention to him, less people are looking at the front line now. So now you can go in. The same way you would capitalize if a Winston was doing this, or a flanker was doing this, right? Same concept. So, like, and, like, you know, if Hammond pushes somebody out of position, all heroes in the game can capitalize on somebody being out of position, right? You go up and you do whatever it is your hero does to the person that's out of position. You throw cooldowns on them, you dive on them, you just try and shoot them, you know? So, don't worry so much about, like, synergizing with Hammond. Just watch what Hammond is doing, and if it looks like Hammond's about to go in and, like, push people towards your team, start moving forward to be ready for when those people get delivered to your team. If he looks like he's just about to fling himself bodily into the enemy team, fucking run forward and get ready to capitalize on all those cooldowns that just got spent on him, right? That kind of thing. That's really how you synergize with Hammond. You're not really worrying about, like, picking heroes to play with him or anything like that. If anything, you can completely disregard Hammond and pick people based around your DPS instead. Like, if your DPS are picking, like, static people, like McCree and Hanzo, pick, like, a shield, like any of the shield tanks, and it'll be fine. If your teammates are picking divers, then pick Winston or D.Va and go in with them, right? Like, you don't really have to worry about synergizing with him in this way. He can kind of, like, slot in, basically, and you just think of him as if he was Winston or a flanker or anything like that, and you try to capitalize as you would with those, if you were playing with those heroes, basically. There you go. It's not as complicated as people think it is. It's just that, you gotta be ready for the Hammond to do some dumb shit, but even if the Hammond is doing dumb shit, like, that is still getting people to blow cooldowns on him. That is still forcing the enemy team to turn and pay attention to him, right? So, either way, still good for you. You've just gotta be ready to capitalize on him doing that dumb shit, you know? Even if they're doing dumb shit, enemy team's still responding to that dumb shit one way or another, so you try to capitalize on that as best you can. That's about it, really. So next up, and this is the last question I've got for you this week. I know, there weren't really that many questions this week, to be honest with you. There were a couple of the usual ones that I always skim over for the most part. I'll do them every now and then, but, you know, how do you win in low SR as a support or tank, or, you know, it's like something I'll usually skip over. We haven't done how do you tank in low SRs for a little while, so, you know, but, like, there was a support one, which we do, like, every week almost, you know, there was what do you record with, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, the next one is, and the last one for this week, is what is a good average for Mercy's damage boost? This is something Mercy players worry about that is really not worth worrying about, because there is such a high variance per game on what your damage boost score is going to be. Because, like, it's going to depend on who your DPS are, more than anything else. It's going to depend on who your DPS are. Because if you got a Junkrat, it's going to, on average, be a little bit higher than it would be. Whereas if you've got, like, Genji, Tracer, it's going to be worse, just by virtue of not having good people to damage boost, right? It's also going to depend on their player's skill. It's also going to depend on what the enemy team is going to play. Like, there is so much variance for this stat that it isn't worth worrying about. Just ask yourself, does it feel like you're using damage boost as much as you can be, right? Like, that's all that's really worth wondering. Like, was I using damage boost as much as I could have been? Is something that is always worth asking as Mercy. But, like, what a good number is will fluctuate so highly. But I'll wager that, like, if you really did average it out, it would be something like between 1,000 and 2,000. It would be very low, actually. It's very hard to get an extremely high damage boost as any character with a damage boost, but like Mercy in particular, like it's usually going to be quite low. Someone like Orisa, you at least get to be damage boosting your whole team, theoretically, right? Mercy, you only get to do that sometimes, depending on what your teammates are doing and how many of them are alive when you ult. And you can make the same case for Orisa, true, you know, yeah. Orisa's damage boost is just better, though. So, the Bongo being much easier to break than Mercy using Valkyrie, but the damage boost is better. Anyway, yeah, it's gonna vary, like, really heavily, so, like, if you're really worrying about, like, what a good thing, like, just think about the game you played, basically, and ask yourself, like, what DPS were you damage boosting? What was the enemy team playing? Were they playing, like, a bunch of shield? Were they playing, like, a real bunker comp? Or were they playing, like, a bunch of flankers? Because either of those things is going to reduce the average amount of damage you would have done. You know, ask what DPS you were playing with, because if you've got Junkrat, it'll be higher. If you've got the flankers, it's going to be lower. Even what tanks you've got, it will affect it. Like, you'll have to do a lot of auditing of the game you just played, basically, to figure out what a good number for it would have been. Which is why I would advise you to instead just worry about, like, did it feel like I was using it as much as I could have done? And if not, try to use it more. If yes, great, carry on as usual. And that's just a more productive way to think about it. I think this is true of most stats, where you have to be really honest with yourself with, like, all stats in every game you play. Because accuracy can lie to you very easily, eliminations can lie to you very easily. Eliminations is a really aggravating one, because it's ones people like to stroke themselves over constantly and, like, shit-talk their teammates on, but eliminations is, if you did 1 damage to a guy that died, you got an elimination, right? Which is not at all the same as a kill. So, like, if you're playing, like, Moiras love to shit-talk having high elimination. So do Lucios, so do Zenyatta's, like, you are going to have high eliminations on those characters because you do area damage, do a lot of just ambient damage, chucking stuff out there, or you are a DPS that happens to have a healing ability. So, like, you know, these stats can lie to you. Damage done can lie to you. Accuracy can lie to you, because if you're playing against, like, a team that's really easy to hit, like, if you're playing, again, you can't do this anymore. So the example I would have been is if you're playing against goats, you're gonna have, like, and suddenly having an accuracy of, like, 60% is not that impressive anymore. Whereas if you're playing against a team of full flankers, then like, 5 flankers and Lucio, an accuracy of 40% becomes pretty good, actually, because you were playing against people that are hard to hit and nothing else, you know? So you have to, like, always, no matter what stat it is, you have to be honest with yourself in the game you just played and think, like, what happened to determine if it was a good number or not, you know? Which is why I think the only stat that is ever worth tracking is deaths, because deaths is the only one that cannot lie to you. Dying less is always better than dying more. There are no exceptions to this. Do not come at me with some hypothetical where, oh, well, if I was playing a tank and I died more and we won, does that mean I was playing well because I was distracting the enemy team? No, it means you were still bad because you fed the enemy team a bunch of ult charge. People have tried this one before. Don't do it. Deaths cannot lie to you. Dying less is always better than dying more. There are no exceptions. Don't bother. So, that's the only one I ever worry about tracking. But if you are, like, some people are super into tracking their stats, and to them, that's how they chart their personal improvement. And if that's what you're into, great, more power to you. You do you. If you love to see your stats average incrementally increase, that's fantastic. But you do have to be honest with yourself every game you play, because there are a bunch of things that can affect this for every stat in the game, basically. So, there you go. So anyway, thank you very much for watching if you did. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I'm more than happy to answer. If you haven't already, you can join our Discord and ask questions more directly and have a conversation about them, or just shitpost with us. I start streaming on Twitch Thursday, Friday, Saturday, 8 p.m. EST till midnight EST. There's a link to the channel in the description. And if you managed to make it all the way through the video and somehow still enjoyed it, please like the video and subscribe for more content of middling quality in the future. And I hope you found the video helpful.